Good evening and welcome to the League of Women Voters Presents. I'm Jim Robertson, and our topic tonight is funding government services. Our guests on my immediate left, Diane Sewell. She's an associate professor of finance and economics at Columbia College. Carl Scala represents the 3rd Ward in the Columbia City Council, and Steve Spellman, vice president and relationship manager with Central Trust and Investment Company. Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks for having us.
You know, over the last year, we've seen several efforts at funding infrastructure, both soft and hard infrastructure. Soft infrastructure like police and fire protection, and the hard infrastructure like sewers and streets, fall by the wayside, starting with the tax increment financing for a large part of the central city last spring that failed in council after a very negative reaction from the affected subdivisions and people in general. The November elections, the development fees, impact fees, and the property tax for police and fire protection both failed by pretty substantial margins. So it's clear that, number one, there's a need, I believe it's clear, a need to continue to develop the infrastructure of Columbia, because Columbia continues to grow. And there's a distaste on the part of the public for the ways we have devised to try to raise that money to develop the infrastructure. So what we're dealing with now is, well, the need apparently is there and won't go away as we grow. We're one of the fastest growing small cities in the country. So we're going to have to figure this out. Diane Sewell is a economist, finance expert at Columbia College. Can you tell us what are the kind of how to finance projects like this?
Sure. And I might start with kind of a disclaimer. I'm certainly not a tax economist, and my knowledge of tax issues is pretty basic. So I think as we start to look at this issue of taxation, maybe before we actually get into kind of the ways that we tax people, is to understand some of the underpinnings of what taxation does and the philosophies of taxation. And maybe that might help us understand a little bit about the public's reaction to additional taxes and why perhaps they haven't been successful. Maybe to begin, if we look at the lens that an economist uses, an economist usually tries to look at taxation from an equity perspective and from an efficiency perspective. And equity, we can understand kind of horizontal equity. We want to be taxed similarly if we're similarly situated with other people. And efficiency, we want to create the least distortion in the markets through our tax system. And so those are kind of the basic underpinnings that we look at as we try to understand various sort of tax schemes. And then to that, we add a layer of kind of philosophies that underpin taxation. And one philosophy would be an ability to pay principle of taxation, where you pay a higher amount of tax if you have the ability, and ability translates usually into income in order to support that level of tax. And the second one would be a benefits principle, which if you're the one who's going to get the service, you should be the one who's paying the tax. And so I think as we look at municipal funding and municipal finance, and we look at the taxes that are associated with it, sometimes they don't necessarily fit that criteria of being equitable and efficient, or they don't necessarily have the tax assessed to the people who have the greatest ability to bear those taxes or who get the benefit of it. And that might be why we see, as Keynes, an economist, would have said, there's a slip between the cup and the lip. We don't always get the taxes that we want when we try to present them to the public.
Well, that can be a political problem. Having people in let's say the northeast of Columbia finance infrastructure in the
Sure.
Southwest. How do you overcome that
Well, not only
sort of,
could be a political problem, it is a political problem. And a lot of this has to do with kind of regionalism within the context of our city, too, as you suggested. But really, there's a balance between local interest, ward interests, like my third ward and the folks that I represent, and the city at large, which is another layer of concern. And I would like to think, and I would like to believe, and I do believe, that my constituents have an understanding of what is necessary for the entire city, in addition to what what is their own parochial interest for their own ward. But there are several ways only of raising this money, and we seem to be in kind of a toxic environment when it comes to the relationship between the community and its government at this point, given the history of the MoDOT tax failure and the county and the fairgrounds failure and the 2 bond issues in November going down. I think there is a tremendous need to restore some trust between the community and its government, which is really getting in the way of various of these avenues of raising money for infrastructure. There's only so many ways that you can do this. There's the sales taxes, there's property taxes, there are fees, which was defeated in November. And ultimately, if all of those that go to a public referendum fail and the folks do not have confidence that you're going to do what it is that you were promising you're going to do, the only recourse is to adjust rates. And that's not very popular because it doesn't require a public referendum. Mm-hmm. So we have a large problem, and really what we need to do, in addition to trying to make these proposals, is to really work on that trust issue between the community and its government.
Steve Spellman, do you agree that the trust is the issue? Is there capacity to pull more taxes, infrastructure, funding from the population if that trust is reestablished?
Yeah, I think we've hit a new era in Boone County and Columbia. Previously, many of our voters have gladly approved of public cost increases, whether that's for sewer, whether that's for water rates, electric, whether that's for schools and other things. But I think that people, their pocketbooks, they're feeling the economy. We had an economic recession that's been, or comeback here, supposedly last few years, that's been unequal, and who benefits from that. And a lot of people are feeling that the cost of living in general, whether that's at the grocery store, et cetera, their costs are going up faster than wages are. And I think there's a feeling that, people's personal budgets are having to stay within a budget, that they have limitations, and that the public sector should do likewise. I think it's interesting, some of the points that both the other panelists here have made about the way we pay for things. Some are general revenue, whether that's police and fire. We have sales tax for the most part that funds those things in the city. There was a proposal that to add to that. I think the property tax there, Prop 1 this last time. I think the feeling was there that the city has our money, they're spending on other things, secondary type things. And so some of these things that we've voted for in the past, well, maybe other things aren't going to pass as easily in the future. And even parks in the community, these quality of life type things. People are saying we need to go back to the basics, and that's what we're hearing, I think, from the community. And as far as the utilities and so forth, the economist here mentioned about user type fees, I think is what you're alluding to. Mm-hmm. And I think that people need to have a feeling that if they're paying sewer rates, that if they have to go up to fix the pipes that are 80 and 100 years old that we're finding out is the age of some of these things, that everybody's paying something equitable. There aren't special deals for special people. Certain developments are getting a special thing, or certain entities are getting a discounted rate, that everybody has confidence that restoring the public trust. I think we need to restore the public trust and align these things so that when there's user fees are applicable, that's the way we go. And if those need to go up, that needs to be a discussion within that utility. And if it's for other things for general revenue, well, then we need to look at our priorities. Do we have secondary things that we're spending on before the primary things are taken care of, like public safety?
So user fees are part of a very complex set of fees, taxes, and other forms of revenue that make city government run. For infrastructure improvements, hasn't traditionally the bond issue
Sure.
been the way to finance growth? And where are we in our bonding capacity now? And why haven't we talked about that in the
Well,
past
we
year?
are. That's the part of the problem here is this whole constellation of asks that we're making from the community, not only in terms of taxes, but as you mentioned, bonding is coming right down the path. As a matter of fact, next Tuesday, or next Monday for the city council meeting, we're going to be taking up the issue of the electric water, the bond. And that has been, we've been negotiating that with the Water and Light Department. They started out at about $90 million, are now down to 60-some million dollars. And I think there may be a few million more that we can deal with. But the way to do that is to kind of make that necessary project in bonding a bare bones project to cover what it is that we need for replacement and capital improvements and all that kind of thing. But certainly get rid of anything else that's in the way, because of again this year we're also going to be facing a capital improvements renewal for the sales tax, a 10-year renewal. We're going to be facing stormwater rates, probably rate increases. So there's lots of things in the pipeline, if you will. And we have to be very judicious on what our asks of the public are, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in.
This, we talked earlier, Steve brought up the 0% financing, very low interest charges, and it's a good time to bond, right?
Sure.
Diane,
Absolutely.
would you, is that a best, I don't know, a best option right now?
Yeah, it's the least expensive option
Right.
too, on top of everything else. Not only are the rates very low, but it's the best way to finance some of these substantial improvements. The question, of course, becomes what is absolutely necessary, and what can, in terms of water and light, what we need to bond and what they can handle in terms of their enterprise funds. That's kind of like the equivalent of the general fund and some of these other departments. So those are the answers that we need to come up with.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the CIP plan, capital improvement projects, and then the 1 to 2 year projects. I think they're maybe $100 million?
Yeah, they're talking in the neighborhood of $80 to $90 million,
Yeah.
or right around there. In 2005, that was 10 years ago, they had asked for $105 million, and that was a combination of the extension of that tax and also a new tax. The new tax did not survive, and the extension of that tax only survived by 127 votes citywide. So it's not a sure thing when we're asking for, and we have to be very careful about what it is that we're asking for. But that is what we are negotiating right now. We're in the midst of getting the committees together, the steering committees, to try and draft the language and determine what needs to be in that bonding process.
Right.
In that,
And there are
process.
3 phases, the 1 to 2 year, the
Yep.
3 to 6 year, and 6 to 10 year.
Right.
Is that correct?
3 to 5 and 6 to 10. Yeah.
3 to 5.
Right.
And overall, about $500 million worth of projects.
Sure. I mean, we're always behind.
Yeah, is that the result of deferred building, or is it growth?
Some of it was deferred because when we had the downturn, we actually deferred some things so that we didn't have to tap too many of our reserves to spend that down. We did have to spend some of that money, but not all of it. So we wound up to be in pretty good shape. But frankly, yes, most of it is the growth is the driver. And growth is not a bad thing. Growth is a necessary thing. You have to have some growth. The question becomes at what level? And we've been experiencing 2.5 or better for quite some time, for many years. And with the new comprehensive plan, we've established kind of an urban service area, because the folks were telling us, my constituents and other people were telling us, before you start annexing and buying new things, new capital costs, we really ought to start taking care of the stuff that's wearing out. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, but there has been a shift in public opinion, and that shift in public opinion really drove that comprehensive plan in terms of focusing on what we have and taking care of that, rather than adding to, continuing on this growth curve.
We've been, Steve, seems to me, focused on the downtown area. for the past few months, and growth and infrastructure in this area, because it's growing in an atypical way.
It's a hot topic,
Yeah,
sure.
and there are needs. I'm going to ask you to be the soothsayer here and to prescribe a solution to growth and paying for infrastructure downtown. What is your vision for downtown
For downtown specifically,
Yeah.
For infrastructure at large.
and development? I mean, there's stuff going on constantly downtown, as there is all over town.
Right.
But downtown is the heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, public infrastructure in the city had been, had a backlog for quite some time. The downtown apartments coming on, that was a acute situation. I can't blame anybody for not having a crystal ball to say, hey, I anticipated all of this. I don't think anybody did. But I think what this brought to fore was that an acute situation where we need a lot more water capacity. We need more electric capacity downtown than we had before. But really it's shown cracks in the foundation, if you will. We had issues before this, and part of it's due to growth, and part of it's due to some other things. As far as downtown, I think, again, kind of going back to, if people that come here and have a water hookup or electric hookup, I mean, if they're paying the same rates as everybody else, I think everybody feels that's fair. One of the proposals from the city manager's office there recently, you mentioned the TIF, the tax increment financing proposal from last year. And that maybe has some arguments for that sort of thing. But one of the main things that I was concerned about is it really violates the concept of the enterprise fund. That money's going into that fund would be diverted from, say, the county. They were concerned about this, the public schools, the library, and really, money that goes into electric utility from electric ratepayers, that needs to go toward the electric utility. We need to close books those are honest books. We're not diverting or subsidizing from either way. Same with sewer and water and these sort of things as well. That the money going in to pay for these things goes to those things. And with the TIF monies, they're supposedly to go for downtown infrastructure, which sounds good, but there were other things that the TIF board could have chosen. A pocket park, train station. I heard a businessman ask Mike Mathis, the city manager, at a forum when all that debate was going on, what if somebody suggested a zoo? Could we put a zoo on the list? Could the TIF commission consider a zoo? And he said, yeah, they could if it got on there. And so, I mean, that's a ridiculous example, of course, and that's the way it was meant, but
Yeah.
It really goes to show, the money that goes into something that we're paying, is it really going toward what we're paying for?
I assume that, or I think that contributed a lot to distrust.
Yeah.
Yes, it
The
did.
climate. Perhaps TIF is usable and some and useful.
The original idea for TIF, I was on the council in my first term from 2007 to 2010, and that's when the TIF commission was formed. We were very reluctant to go along with TIFs because there were bad examples in St. Louis and in Kansas City and lots of other places, but we did so reluctantly to establish the TIF commission, but only to review TIFs on a case-by-case basis, a very special kind of basis. And when the city manager came here, in my second term, when the city manager came here and I had experience with him and we chatted about TIFs, he wanted to expand that TIF program for TIF districts. And what you were kind of alluding to, lots of these programs, there was quite a public outcry and it wasn't handled very well. I think, and there was at least initially there was the idea that this was going to happen. I mean, it was like a freight train rolling down the tracks, and frankly was derailed. I was not in favor of it. Eventually, a majority of the council was not in favor. It was a close vote. It was a 4-3 vote, but that didn't happen. And it's because of that, because of this, I think, overconfidence in the TIF actually happening. Really started this deterioration in the public trust between the community and its government.
And it was sold as the end-all, be-all.
That's
We've
right.
got, this is the only solution. There is no plan B, I think is what was communicated.
That's right.
It didn't go through, but then the public perception, I mean, Carl knows about the numbers and so forth, but there's a perception of the public that there's a special fund and they found some money for it anyway, and it's.
And all these
what-
Plan Bs started to appear.
We don't know
right?
what's going on,
That's
and that
right.
goes back to trust. They say they're gonna do one thing, and then something else happens, and we're just, I think intelligent people in the community, intelligent voters are saying, they're scratching their heads saying, I'm not sure what I'm gonna get here. Is
Right.
this really the deal?
Well, and kind of the nail of the coffin, too. You mentioned this business about high-density student residential housing downtown and how no one knew it was coming. I serve on a University Communities Council, the National League of Cities, and some of these folks did know it was coming because it's happening in every university community across the
agree.
country. Yeah, Fort Collins and
Madison.
all kinds of places. Some of those folks handled it a little bit better than we did. We were unprepared for that. And what really, I think, put the nail in the coffin for this deterioration of trust business was when some of these large out-of-state corporations who were building these projects were accommodated by shifting some of the sewer money for local projects for people who had backups for the past 5 or 10 years, and they were accommodating these large projects because that was the epitome of growth. That really caused a lot, and is still, I think, causing a lot of, obviously, there were 2 petition drives, Opus, there's suits now,
Right.
it's-
Let me switch directions here a little bit. We've got, and this comes up frequently, unrestricted funds in various accounts, the utility accounts, you name it. Almost every account has an unrestricted fund, and in the aggregate, there's a lot of millions of dollars that are unrestricted. And naturally, I think some people say, why don't you use that money?
Well,
How do you answer that?
There's a huge difference between unrestricted funds and unencumbered funds. And the folks in the finance department would tell you that, yes, nominally they're called unrestricted funds. That doesn't mean that they're available to spend on projects. There are some projects that take some period of time that some of these funds are actually pledged to those projects, and they're encumbered. But they are in a category called unrestricted. And that causes a lot of confusion, I think, out there in the public in terms of just having a pot of money that you can spend on certain projects. That isn't really the way it works. I would like to try and assure everybody that we just do not have these unrestricted pots of money available to spend on exigencies as they arise. We really have to do a little bit more planning than that. It's not quite that simple.
Has the city done an adequate job of explaining that, you think?
The budget is a devilishly difficult thing to explain, and it's taken me several years to get a handle on, really what is involved. We need to do a much better job on that. And it doesn't help that in this era of the internet and Facebook, and I love Facebook, I spend a tremendous amount of time on Facebook, but the problem with it is that you have to, when you present these things to the public or anyone else, some of it is not altogether true, or a lot of it is lacking a lot of context. And to make sure that you answer all of those things takes an enormous amount of time. So it's a huge challenge, but we certainly do need to make the effort to make sure that people understand what this is all about, and that does not additionally contribute to the mistrust that people already have.
So to kind of sum, because we're running out of time here soon, so to kind of sum up what we've talked about is that to continue to develop the infrastructure that's really critical for Columbia, it's going to take a combination of fees, user fees, of bonding, and what else?
I also think it's going to take a genuine effort to create these public-private partnerships that we talk about all the time. We got to give a lot of lip service to them. There are some that are very successful. The mayor and his airport initiatives, and the university and the county and everybody chipped in, and that is a very successful public-private partnership. But we need more of those in this era of uncertainty that the public has about paying the bills, and maybe not focusing as much on maintenance as we should. That's going to be, I think, essential into helping fund some of these projects.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for being here. It's been a very interesting conversation, and of course, the way Columbia grows, the infrastructure that we maintain and multiply. Those are all issues that each of us should be concerned about and interested in and have a voice in. So I appreciate your thoughts on it, and it's time for us to go. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, good evening.